Hey there history buffs, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Hannah, and today we're diving into one of the rarest and most dramatic scenarios in royal history. The years when England/Great Britain had 3 monarchs in just 1 year. Having 2 monarchs in 1 year is fairly common. It happens when a monarch dies, is usurped, or abdicates. But 3? That's rare and unprecedented. And that's exactly why we're going to look at the occasions when it did happen and why. But before we start, if you're new here, hello and welcome. If you enjoy my content, please do make sure to like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Our story begins with Edward the Confessor, the penultimate Anglo-Saxon king of England. Born in around 1003 in Oxfordshire, Edward was the son of Ethelred the Unready and Emma of Normandy. His early life was marked by turmoil following Danish invasions. Edward spent much of his youth in exile in Normandy. This long stay would later play a critical role in shaping English history. Edward returned to England and ascended the throne in 1042. Restoring the native English house of Wessex after decades of Danish rule. His reign is often seen as relatively peaceful, but Edward himself was a reserved, almost monastic figure, deeply pious and more focused on religion than politics, which earned him the title the Confessor. In fact, one of his greatest legacies is a religious one. He oversaw the construction of Westminster Abbey, which obviously still stands today, and that was consecrated in December 1065. Fittingly, it would go on to become the coronation church of English and British monarchs. But Edward's real failure, and the spark for what would become a royal crisis, was his lack of an heir. He died childless on the 5th of January 1066, with no direct successor. The throne became a prize in a high-stakes power struggle. 3 men would rise to claim it, well, kind of 4, but only one would succeed. The first to step forward was Harold Godwinson, a powerful English nobleman and, crucially, Edward's brother-in-law. Born in around 1022, Harold was the son of Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, one of the most powerful figures in England, and Geitha Thorkelsdottir, a noblewoman. Sorry, what? Geitha Thorkelsdottir, a noblewoman of Danish descent. Yeah, no shit. When Godwin died, Harold inherited his title and influence, becoming the most powerful man in England after the king. Although not of royal blood, Harold was highly respected. He was experienced, charismatic, and had proven himself in battle. His family dominated English politics, and in the final years of Edward's reign, Harold was effectively running the kingdom. Harold's personal life was just as politically savvy. For many years, he was in a hand-fast marriage with Edith Swanneck, amazing name, with whom he had several children. But later, to secure northern support, he formally married Edelgith, sister of 2 northern earls. When Edward died, Harold was chosen by the Wittenagemot, a royal council, and crowned king on the 6th of January 1066, just 1 day after Edward's death. It was a swift and decisive move to secure stability. But Harold's reign would be anything but stable. In the span of just a few weeks, he faced not 1, but 2 foreign invasions. First from Harald Hardrada of Norway, who landed in the north with a large force. Harold raced to meet him at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September, where he achieved a stunning victory. But even as he celebrated that triumph, word came of a second invasion. This time, from the south, William of Normandy had landed on the coast. Harold hurried south and met William in battle at Hastings on the 14th of October 1066. It was a brutal day-long fight. Harold was killed, either by an arrow to the eye or cut down in melee, and with him died not only a king, but the entire Anglo-Saxon royal line. The final king of 1066 was the man who would change England forever. William, Duke of Normandy, soon to be known as William the Conqueror, was born in around 1028. William was the illegitimate son of Duke Robert I of Normandy and Herleva, the daughter of a tanner. His illegitimacy earned him the nickname William the Bastard, but it didn't stop him from inheriting the duchy at just 7 years old. His early life was chaotic, filled with assassination attempts and rebellions, but William proved to be tough, politically astute, and utterly ruthless. He grew into a formidable leader, consolidating his control over Normandy with both force and diplomacy. He married Matilda of Flanders, a politically advantageous union that produced a large family, including William Rufus and Henry, both future kings of England. William's claim to the English throne was based on blood. He was a distant cousin of Edward the Confessor, and allegedly
Allegedly. What does that spell, class? Allegedly.
On a promise. Norman sources claim that Edward had pledged the crown to him, and that Harold had even sworn to uphold this claim during a visit to Normandy. So when Harold took the throne, William saw it as a betrayal. He gained support from the Pope, assembled a large invasion force, and landed in England in late September 1066. His decisive victory at the Battle of Hastings cleared his path to the throne, after taking key towns and forcing the submission of the English nobility. William was crowned King of England on Christmas Day in Westminster Abbey. We're now going to skip forward 400 years, from the Normans to the Plantagenets. Some of you may recognise or have even guessed what this next year is. That's right, it's 1483, the year when we had Kings Edward IV, V, and Richard III. Just like in 1066, England saw the reign of 3 monarchs, but this time instead of invasions, it was court intrigue, betrayal, and one of the most enduring royal mysteries that drove this drama. This year marked a turning point in the Wars of the Roses, and it ended with the rise of one of England's most controversial kings, Richard III. King Edward IV, a towering figure both literally and politically, is on the throne during the Wars of the Roses. Born on the 28th of April 1442, Edward was the eldest son of Richard, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville. A leading figure of the House of York, he first became king in 1461, deposing the Lancastrian king Henry VI. Though briefly ousted in 1470, he reclaimed the throne the following year and ruled until his death in 1483. Edward was charismatic, popular, and militarily successful, but his reign was marked by family tension, especially with his brother George, Duke of Clarence, who was executed for treason in 1478. Edward shocked the court by secretly marrying Elizabeth Woodville, a widowed commoner, in 1464. The match caused friction with his nobility, especially the powerful Nevilles, but it also brought the ambitious Woodville family into royal politics, and they would play a key role in the crisis to come. In late March 1483, after a fishing trip on the Thames, Edward fell suddenly ill. He died on the 9th of April 1483 at just 40 years old. His eldest son, Edward V, was only 12 years old, and with that the crown passed to a child, and into the hands of dangerous ambition. Born on the 2nd of November 1470 in sanctuary at Westminster Abbey during his father's brief exile, Edward V was the eldest son of Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville. At the time of his father's death, Edward was living at Ludlow Castle, preparing for his role as king. He was immediately proclaimed king, but he was a minor. His father had named Richard, Duke of Gloucester, his uncle, as Lord Protector. What followed was a fast-moving and ruthless power struggle. On the 30th of April, Richard and Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, intercepted the young king at Stony Stratford, arrested his maternal uncle, Earl Rivers, and took Edward into their custody. By the 4th of May, Edward had arrived in London. His mother, Elizabeth Woodville, fled to sanctuary in Westminster Abbey with her remaining children, including her younger son, Richard, Duke of York. Just over a month later, Richard, Lord Protector, ordered that the young Richard, Duke of York, be removed from sanctuary to join his brother in the Tower of London, officially in preparation for the coronation. But instead of a coronation came a bombshell. On the 22nd of June, a sermon was preached claiming that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, citing a pre-contract of marriage. This made all of Edward IV's children illegitimate, and thus Edward V ineligible to be king. 3 days later, on the 25th of June, an assembly of nobles and clergy offered the crown to Richard. That same day, Rivers and the other Woodville allies were executed. Edward V's brief reign came to an end before he was even crowned. He and his brother, the Duke of York, disappeared soon afterwards, becoming the infamous princes in the Tower, a mystery that still haunts British history today. And I have multiple videos on that, so go check them out if that interests you. The final monarch of 1483 was Richard III, brother to Edward IV, uncle to Edward V, and perhaps one of the most debated figures in royal history. Born on the 2nd of October 1452, Richard was a loyal Yorkist commander, known for his military skill and political caution. But in 1483, his actions would shock the realm. After taking control of his nephews and eliminating Woodville opposition, Richard accepted the crown on the 26th of June 1483. He was crowned on the 6th of July at Westminster Abbey, and it's believed that he was the first king to take the coronation oath in English rather than Latin or French. But his rule was haunted from the very beginning. On the 13th of June, he had Lord Hastings, a staunch supporter of Edward IV, executed without trial. On the same day Richard was offered the crown, he had Rivers, Thomas Vaughan, and Richard Grey executed too. That summer, the two princes vanished from the Tower. While no definitive evidence exists, many suspect Richard of orchestrating their deaths to secure his claim. It's a suspicion that would tarnish his legacy forever. Richard tried to consolidate his own rule, investing his son Edward as Prince of Wales and showing moments of progressive governance. But his hold on the crown was weak. By October, the first major rebellion, led by Buckingham once his ally, had erupted. It failed and Buckingham was executed on the 2nd of November. But the discontent didn't disappear. Many former Yorkists defected to Henry Tudor, setting in motion the final act of the Wars of the Roses, and Richard's own downfall at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. It would be Edward IV's daughter and Edward V's eldest sister, Elizabeth, who would rightfully reclaim the throne, although she would sit on it as consort, not regnant. 1553 is the next time skip, so actually it's a lot closer than what the last time skip was between 1066 and 1483. I mean, actually, if we think about it, because we're going to be looking at Edward VI, which is 1553, Edward VI is the grandson of King Henry VII, who was briefly mentioned in the last one. So it is very close. Obviously the two never met each other though, as awkward. Henry kind of died way before Edward was even born, so yeah. Anyway, back on to 1553. Born in 1537 to King Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, Edward was the long-awaited male heir to the Tudor dynasty. But his reign, which began in 1547 when he was only 9, that's crazy, was never really his own. Real power rested in the hands of his uncle, the Duke of Somerset. And when he died, it then kind of went to the Duke of Northumberland. John Dudley was never officially Lord Protector or anything like that, because Edward was kind of like old enough that he didn't really need one, even though technically he did. But he kind of, the Duke of Northumberland kind of slid into the Duke of Somerset's role, but wasn't officially given the title. But I think it's just more the fact that John Dudley was just more of a slippery, slimy, manipulative person rather than anything else. But that's besides the point. That's not what we're here to discuss. Edward was a precocious child, fiercely intelligent and deeply committed to Protestant reform. He wasn't just a figurehead for his councillors' policies. No, he actually believed in them. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your view, he died in early 1553, most likely from TB. And as he faded, so did the future of Protestant England. The law was clear. The crown should pass to his half-sister Mary, Henry VIII's eldest daughter. But Mary was a Catholic, and Edward, along with his advisors, feared that her rule would reverse the Protestant gains made during his short reign, and they were right to fear so. So Edward did something extraordinary. He, / the Duke of Northumberland, rewrote the line of succession. Edward excluded both Mary and his younger sister Elizabeth from inheriting the throne. Instead, he named Lady Jane Grey, his cousin and also a great-granddaughter of Henry VII, and a devout Protestant, as his heir. Jane also, just coinky-dinky, happened to be Northumberland's daughter-in-law. Woohoo! Wow, what a coincidence! Northumberland's definitely not got anything to do with that, right? Right? I mean, let's be honest, the political motivations were crystal clear. Edward died on the 6th of July 1553, but his death was kept a secret for several days, as Northumberland scrambled to secure Jane's succession. On the 10th of July, Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen. We don't know her exact birthday, so she was either 16 or 17, round about there. But she was also highly educated, fiercely Protestant, and entirely unprepared for the role. Which she didn't want, by the way. She was forced to accept that. Oh yeah, we've got reports suggesting that she fainted or even wept when she was told she was going to be queen, and only relented under immense pressure from her family and the political elite. Her reign would last just technically 9 but 13 days. While Jane sat uneasily in the Tower of London, Mary acted swiftly. She knew what was coming. Instead of walking into a trap in London, she fled to East Anglia, where she began to gather support. And it came from nobles, local gentry, and thousands of ordinary people who viewed Mary as the rightful heir. Northumberland's forces faltered. His plan was crumbling. By the 19th of July, the Privy Council, sensing that the political winds were shifting, abandoned Jane and proclaimed Mary as Queen. Jane was arrested and confined to the Tower. Though initially spared, her fate was sealed months later, after her father's involvement in Wyatt's Rebellion, an uprising against Mary's planned marriage to Philip II of Spain. Jane was executed in February 1554. She was still a teenager. Then came Mary I, England's first queen regnant. Born in 1516 to Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, Mary had endured years of humiliation and marginalisation. She was declared illegitimate after Henry divorced her mother and spent much of her youth in fear of her life, especially during the reign of her younger brother. But now she was queen, and she was wasting no time in shaping England into her Catholic image. Mary's reign marked the beginning of a Catholic resurgence. She restored papal authority, repealed Protestant legislation, and began a campaign of persecuting against religious dissenters. Over 280 Protestants were burnt at the stake during her 5-year reign, earning her the infamous title Bloody Mary. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain was deeply unpopular and politically disastrous, though she hoped it would produce a Catholic heir and secure England's future. The union, however, was childless. When she died in 1558, her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth inherited the crown, and with it, a kingdom once again on the brink of transformation. So basically, Mary proved that Edward and his council were right for fearing that she would turn the country Catholic, because she did. And then Elizabeth turned them back again. Talk about whiplash. When we think of the phrase, the year of 3 monarchs, our minds often go to turbulent succession crisis or brief reigns, like the examples we've had so far. But 1688 is a different kind of anomaly. But 1688 is a different type of fish. Kessler fish, pot of fish, there we go. Not a story of swift deaths and desperate claimants, but of revolution, exile, and a monarchy turned upside down. Technically, this wasn't a year of 3 reigns, but it is still of 3 monarchs. And while 2 of them, William and Mary, ruled together, their ascent marked one of the most profound turning points in British history. So while William and Mary may technically be an honourable mention on this list, their story is still worth telling. And they still count. It's still 3 monarchs. So let's start with the monarch who lost his throne, King James II. He became king in 1685 and was born in 1633. He was the second surviving son of King Charles I and the younger brother of King Charles II. James was a Catholic, an identity that made him deeply unpopular in a nation that had become firmly Protestant. Yet for the first years of his reign, the country tolerated him, in part out of loyalty to the monarchy, and in part because he had no male heir. His Protestant daughter, Mary, was next in line. But in June 1688, everything changed. James's second wife, Mary of Modena, gave birth to a son, James Francis Edward, and suddenly England faced the prospect of a Catholic dynasty. For many, this was unacceptable. You only got to think back to the last time they had a Catholic monarch, and that was Mary. You know, Bloody Mary. 7 Protestant nobles, known as the Immortal Seven, secretly reached out to Mary's husband, William of Orange, a Protestant prince of the Netherlands, and invited him to intervene. William was no stranger to English politics. Born in 1650, he was not only King James II's son-in-law, but also his nephew. The product of generations of, shall we say, tangled Stuart lineage. His marriage to Mary was strategic and fraught, but politically essential. He was a seasoned military commander and a staunch opponent of King Louis XIV of France, and he saw England's instability as both a threat and an opportunity. On the 5th of November 1688, William landed on English soil with a fleet and a Dutch army. As he marched inland, support for James evaporated. Protestant nobles defected. Even James's own daughter, Anne, later Queen Anne, abandoned him. By December, James had fled to France. Parliament, viewing his flight as abdication, declared the throne vacant. Now came the question of succession. Mary was next in line. Many argue she should reign alone. After all, she was the rightful heir. But William refused to accept a subordinate role, and Mary, ever deferential to her husband and a reluctant ruler by nature, refused to rule without him. So, in a constitutional first and so far last, William and Mary were offered the crown jointly. On the 13th February 1689, they were proclaimed co-monarchs of England, Scotland and Ireland. Their coronation followed in April, but while they ruled together in name, in practice it was William who held the reins of power. Parliament granted him the sole and full exercise of regal power during their joint reign. Mary II, born in 1662, was just 26 when she became queen. She had been raised a Protestant despite her father's Catholicism and was deeply committed to her faith. Though she would prove capable when William was away on campaign, she often played a secondary role in the eyes of contemporaries, and by her own choice. William, by contrast, was a hardened statesman. His rule marked a firm rejection of Catholic monarchy and an embrace of Protestant Europe. His reign wasn't just symbolic, he brought England into the broader European power struggle, most notably against France. He was in many ways England's first modern king. Their reign ushered in a new era. Parliament passed the Declaration of Right, later known as the Bill of Rights, in December 1689, a cornerstone of Britain's constitutional monarchy. It limited royal power, prohibited Catholic succession, and established parliamentary supremacy. Never again would the crown wield the same unchecked authority as the Stuarts before them, and Tudors and Plantagenets and the rest of them. The events of 1688 became known as the Glorious Revolution. Glorious because it was supposedly bloodless. It wasn't, but because it avoided a civil war and because it remade the monarchy without destroying it. So while William and Mary's joint rule officially began in 1689, the revolution that put them on the throne happened in 1688, the year England had, in effect, 3 monarchs: James II, the deposed king in exile, and William III and Mary II, the constitutional pioneers who reshaped the monarchy forever. The last and most recent year on this list is 1936. King George V has reigned for over 25 years, a steadying presence through World War I, political reform, and social upheaval. Born in 1865, the second son of Edward VII, he was never expected to be king, but the early death of his older brother put him on the path to the throne in 1910. Under George V, the monarchy modernised. The royal family's German name was dropped during the war, replaced with Windsor, and the monarchy began to engage more with ordinary citizens. He was widely respected for his sense of duty, though behind the scenes he was conservative, stern, and cautious about change. But by the mid-1930s, George's health was deteriorating. A lifelong heavy smoker, he suffered from chronic bronchitis and heart problems. On the 20th of January 1936, he died at Sandringham House. Within hours, his eldest son was proclaimed king, and so began the brief, controversial reign of King Edward VIII. Born in 1894, Edward was charming, athletic, and immensely popular. As Prince of Wales, he toured the empire and was seen as a symbol of youthful modernity. But beneath the public image was a man increasingly disenchanted with royal life, impulsive, restless, and privately determined to live on his own terms. Almost immediately, Edward began breaking with royal tradition. He insisted on attending his own proclamation, a constitutional no-no. He ignored ministerial advice, showed disdain for official paperwork, and raised eyebrows by publicly speaking on political issues, and also Nazis. But it was his private life that would trigger a constitutional crisis. Edward had fallen in love with Wallis Simpson, an American socialite and divorcee, and by the time he took the throne, she was still married, to her second husband, and already pursuing a second divorce. This presented a problem. As king, Edward was supreme governor of the Church of England, which at the time forbade the remarriage of divorced persons if their ex-spouses were still alive. Marrying Wallis would defy both church doctrine and the moral standards expected of the crown. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin gave Edward 3 options. You abandon the relationship, you marry against the government's advice and cause a constitutional crisis, or you abdicate. Edward chose the third. On the 10th of December 1936, in the presence of his 3 brothers, he signs the instrument of abdication. The next evening, in a calm, carefully measured BBC radio address, he told the world, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." I hope you enjoyed my personation. With those words, Edward VIII became the only monarch in British history to voluntarily give up the throne. The very next day, his younger brother, Prince Albert, Duke of York, became King George VI. Albert, or Bertie, was never meant to be king. He was quiet, reserved, and plagued by a lifelong stammer. He had always lived in Edward's shadow, but in the wake of the abdication, the crown needed stability, and Bertie, reluctant though he was, stepped up. Born in 1895, just 18 months after Edward, George VI faced enormous pressure from the outset. He had to restore public confidence in the monarchy while leading Britain through the storm clouds of war. But with the support of his wife, Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, and his eldest daughter, Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth II, he rose to the occasion. His reign would be defined by duty, dignity, and endurance, leading the nation through World War II and beginning the transition from empire to Commonwealth. The events of 1936 reshaped the monarchy forever. Edward VIII's abdication wasn't just a scandal, it was a test of Britain's unwritten constitution. For the first time, it became clear that a monarch could not simply be a king by right of birth. He had to act in accordance with the government, with Parliament, and with the people's expectations. This crisis changed the royal succession. Had Edward not abdicated, there would not have been Queen Elizabeth II, and the entire Windsor dynasty would look very different today. So that's all of the years where we've had 3 monarchs in 1 year. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.